So I'd like to start with land acknowledgement. The city of Halifax is situated in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional territory or lands of the Mi'kmaq people. My name is Ian. I am the moderator / co-presenter on the first two, and I'm so pleased to be joined by Kevin, who's kind of a big deal at the Calgary Drop-In, Nicole, who's kind of a big deal in Niagara Region, and Michelle and Carla, who are like really big deals in Kawartha Lakes. I have the privilege of knowing all of the presenters, having done some work in their communities, and I'm really excited for this session because you're going to see a transition. What does it look like to truly be housing focused and shelter, and how do we get people from shelter into housing as rapidly as possible? When there are some very specific niche needs that need to be met, how does bridge housing fit into that, and how is bridge housing different from interim housing or transitional housing or other models? That comes up a lot. And then really looking at what does it look like to focus on permanent accommodation with the right supports, but using a transition in place model to get the composition and the culture that we want in the building. I will kick it off and then turn it over to Kevin to talk a little bit more about person-centered and trauma-informed considerations in a housing-focused shelter. We started by just saying, let's take a look at all the different ways there can be more trauma-informed in shelter. And as we started digging into that, we said, well, we should probably talk more about what it's like to be person-centered and trauma-informed. And then we said, okay, well, if we're just person-centered and trauma-informed and we don't talk about the housing-focused part, then we're going to miss the whole point of this, which is to help people progress out of shelter into housing as rapidly as possible. And I would say that this has been a great opportunity for Kevin and I and our organizations to collaborate, both the Org Code team and the Calgary Drop-In Center team. The opportunity to take a whole bunch of lessons that I've learned in my travels, having been to probably hundreds of shelters at this point in my career, picking up what do you like and then taking it somewhere else. I call that legal larceny, stealing good ideas from one place and transplanting them to another. And really starting to say, what would it look like if you put it into one document? And so I'm really proud of the fact that Kevin and I have whipped off more than 100 pages of insights on everything from when a person first arrives for the very first time at a shelter, right through to if you could rebuild the entire building, how would you do trauma-informed design? This obviously is super critically important given the nature of the population that we serve to be trauma-informed and person-centered. It also is really important to me that we acknowledge that people with lived and living experience have had direct input into the document and the creation, from focus groups and discussions with people with lived experience through to getting feedback on people's experience of having used DI services, and then other focus groups have done in other shelters. So that centers the work. Direct frontline service staff really talking through what is possible, what isn't possible. That didn't stop us from framing things that might seem aspirational. Again, having seen it in place in one place leads me to believe it can be replicable in another. And then the third consideration is, what does this mean for supervisors, managers, executives, boards? How do we support our workforce to be able to deliver services in a way that are truly trauma-informed and person-centered? And how does it add value to the people that we serve? With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to walk through high-level presentation of what we're discussing. And at the end of the presentation, there are some postcards with the chapter headings and a QR code where you too can download the entire document and have something to read on your plane ride home. Kevin.
Thank you, Ian. Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Webb. I'm from Calgary, so I'm here representing Treaty Number 7 today. I'm in a room of people that work with individuals that are experiencing homelessness, so I'm only going to touch on actually what does trauma-informed mean, very high level. But really, it's that approach that we want to provide supports and services that recognize that there is trauma, right? And how do we incorporate the knowledge that we know that there's trauma into the service delivery that we are able to give. And then what does it mean to be person-centered? Really, it's that we want to be there for the individual, understanding that the individual's needs are going to be different from mine to Ian's to Ty's to anyone's. And we wanted to see how we could incorporate that throughout that journey through shelter as well. And housing focused. this is the one section that I feel I could just sit here and talk for about the next 4 hours on. So, in a shelter environment, I should talk a little bit about the Calgary Drop-In Center here. We started our journey to be housing focused in 2017. We are a very, very large emergency shelter in Calgary.
How big are you?
About this big. We actually have occupancy for just under 1,000 people a night in one building. Our occupancy last night was 646 individuals. We're an adult shelter, low barrier shelter. So to see that shift in a shelter that large and see the outcomes that we've been able to achieve, I can't talk highly enough about the housing focused work. Ian touched on this. We really wanted to take a collaborative approach when we were looking at this, using the experience of Ian, some things that I had seen in shelters, and then we did focus groups with individuals that are housed from the DI in housing right now, and talked to them. We gave them a little overview of like what is trauma-informed care, and said, think about any time you had a touch point in shelter, how would you want to be treated differently? I think one of the big things that came out of that piece for me was how much people dislike the term clients. And wanted to be called, even guests was a little iffy, but how they felt that continued to follow them wherever they went, right? So we've already started to make that shift, right, on calling people guests instead of clients. And then we had a number of people review the document as we kind of got it to a final stage, which landed us on a whole breakdown and process of every kind of touch point an individual has in shelter, in a person-centered trauma-informed shelter, on how we can do it differently. So we wanted to be really more focused on trauma-informed. That's where the conversation started. Where it started for me personally was I had an individual that was at the DI, and every time she came in to meet with me, it would either be incredibly elevated or incredibly calm and very serene. I don't know, he's in the room today. I don't know how Ty and I figured this out. But what it came down to was my wedding ring. If I was wearing my wedding ring, this individual was up here. If I wasn't wearing my wedding ring, it was down here. And after a number of conversations to find out that she had a long history of trauma with domestic violence. And that's where this conversation, for me, started about how do we do things differently. So we have a number of different chapters throughout the whole document, which again, it's open up and free for everybody here. We've looked at new to homelessness, so that initial engagement when someone first walks into the building. How do we make it welcoming? How do we embrace them in a way that recognizes them as an individual, recognizes their trauma, as well as being empathetic and hospitable. And then we got really into daily operations, which is like a list like this long, of everything from wake-ups, lights out, bag searches, anything that you can think of where an individual has a touch point in shelter. We took a hard look at it and tried to see what can we adjust to do that. And then we had engagement in housing-focused services. So looking at things like case management, understanding the strengths, looking at what does a planned exit look like, right? How can we make that not just, example being not just a single cutoff point, but how do we do, I love the term like a hot transfer, or how do we support the individual through that phase a little better? And then we looked at responding to unmet expectations, which is really things like, issuing bars or restrictions of service. This was probably the hardest chapter to write, and I think this is one that a lot more feedback is going to be really appreciated. But how do we do those things and support the individual when they come back? Or how do we support the individual when they're not maybe allowed in a shelter for whatever reason, right? Or as they're exiting, how do we support the individual to ensure that there's something there? And then we looked at signage. I think that signage came into this whole story because of a sign that was at the DI. There was one in our clothing room when Ian was out for a visit that was not very good. And I think that's where the conversation started around signage of, how do we develop signage in our buildings that is actually trauma-informed? How do we do it that ensure that every single individual in the shelter is going to be able to understand it? Looking at language barriers and how do we ensure that an individual is going to actually see what that is, and is there literacy issues, or can we use pictures more, and really trying to adapt to meet everyone's needs instead of the needs of the agency. And then we looked at external partners. So looking at volunteers are such an important thing in shelters, as well as any other organization. So how do we set up our volunteers to be trauma-informed and person-centered? As well as looking at things as like respect for other colleagues from other organizations, right? Some strategies around that. Like, as though we're all sitting in this room today and we're all from different organizations, how do we come together not just once a year, but how do we come together every day to fight this fight for homelessness? Then we really wanted to look at how we empower individuals with lived experience. So the roles of lived experience in shelter, when and how we get the input from individuals with lived experience. I was mentioning to Ian a couple minutes ago, I was at a presentation this morning, and there was a whole group that put together a lived experience training on Housing First from the perspective of the user. And I was just like, that is so what this is about. The appropriate use of data, avoid weaponizing it, or how to make appropriate decisions using data. And then looking at the consideration in the built form. So really a section of, if you're looking to design a new shelter, if you're expanding your shelter services, what are some key recommendations when you're doing that on maintaining that trauma-informed and person-centered approach? So looking at things like trauma-informed design and that type of thing. It has been an absolute labor of love to work on this, but we don't feel that it's done. One of the pieces in the manual is actually my email address, and we would absolutely love everyone in this room and all of your colleagues to take it and send your feedback. We figure that this is a live document that is going to continue to grow for the entire, hopefully all of Canada shelters, if not further. And I really, really cannot wait to hear the feedback and any other ideas, right? Because we know that it is just the tipping point of the work that we can do through creating shelters to be that trauma-informed care, person-centered, and housing-focused.
Yay, Kevin. All right, so then we have, there it is. Presentation next on bridge housing, which I will also kick off.
No, I'm kicking it off.
You're kicking off? Okay, well, other than to say, here's Nicole.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today, and Ian for being willing to do this presentation with me. So we're here to talk about bridge housing. So my name's Nicole. I work for Niagara Region. And we're here to talk to you about our bridge housing program. So just to give you some background, Niagara Region is the service manager for 12 lower tier municipalities. Our population is just around under 500,000 people. And I want to talk to you, give you a bit of a background on how this idea started, how we got to where we are today, and then I'll pass it over to Ian to talk about exactly what bridge housing is. So, the pandemic, right? That was a tough time for everyone. And in Niagara Region itself, as a service manager, decided that we were going to operate the isolation shelter for the homeless. So never being in direct operations as a service manager before, we took on the task, rented out a hotel, begged our funded providers to lend us some staff that wanted to work there. And so the community kind of came together And what we found was after the first 6 months of the pandemic, there was a bit of a lull, right? So not as many people testing positive, not as many people needing to isolate. And we had all of these rooms in this hotel. So I begged my boss, who's sitting in the front row, to let me test coordinated access on a really small scale during the pandemic. So we became a Built for Zero community in 2019, and we were trying to implement a coordinated access system. So there was a core group of individuals on the streets that refused to access shelter or could not access shelter due to restrictions, mental health, addictions during the pandemic. And so we have an assertive outreach team that we're connecting with these folks daily, and we had all of these empty rooms in this hotel. So I suggested, let's become a center of excellence for what a low barrier housing focused shelter looks like in Niagara Region, and have exit points through Housing First, Home for Good programs, and really try to get some of these folks off the streets, off of the encampments, and in, because the whole world closed down. There wasn't even a clean washroom for people to use. Kathy graciously said okay. And so we started to learn a lot about the individuals that were refusing to come in or didn't want to come in or could not access. So we learned that restrictions were huge within our shelter system in Niagara Region, and that there was not a whole lot of tolerance at that time for addictions, for mental health. People didn't feel safe accessing shelter. And although folks had life skills, they lay dormant for a really long time, right? So I can't even tell you the amount of microwaves that got set on fire in that hotel, because it was just one of those life skills that folks hadn't used in so long. So one day over lunch, we got a phone call from the city of Niagara Falls, one of our 12 municipalities, and we were told that there was an old Carnegie library that the city owned and that they were going to sell it to us for $1. That should have been our first clue. Heritage building, not a great renovation. So myself, my boss Kathy, and another manager on our team were sort of sitting around this hotel in the kitchen area where our office was, where we worked out of during the pandemic, and we said, what can we do? What have we learned, and what can we do? And so we knew we had this group of individuals, really high acuity, substance use, needed something really low barrier, needed more access to healthcare, to mental health supports. And so we looked at a blueprint of this building, and it's 3 floors, and we had all of these crazy ideas. And I said, hold on. And I texted Ian, and I said, you had 10 minutes to talk. And I put him on speakerphone, and we were literally over lunch. We talked about what we wanted to do, and Ian said, I think what you're talking about is bridge housing. And that's sort of how this concept or idea came to be. So I'll pass it on to Ian.
So, yes, the conversation, good to be home and just get text messages. But think of bridge housing as short-term supportive housing. That's the first thing. So you think about everything that you find in permanent supportive housing, and you're going to put the same level of staffing and supports in place for a shorter period of time. The entire approach is identifying and inviting people with really complex needs who aren't being well served through the rest of the system, and inviting them to participate while you figure out the most appropriate permanent housing option. And it's entirely voluntary. So we don't say as a condition of ever going back to shelter or a condition of ever getting other housing, you have to come through here. There is not this big, large, open application process. And then really looking at the tenets of it, person-centered, strengths-based, trauma-informed, but those services being available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, customized to unique needs of the individual. So it's not a program that you go through, it's an individually customized support plan. And there's no predetermined program model that people have to comply with as a condition of stay. So how is this different from traditional transitional housing models? Well, if we look at the traditional transitional housing model, people could just generally apply, as opposed to you're invited. People are screened in because of their complexity of current presenting needs and potential benefits of customized support, not screened out. Lengths of stay are as short as possible. So don't think of whatever your provincial or territorial legislation allows by way of transitional housing And that's the focus? No, the focus is from the time they show up to the time that we can find a safe and appropriate alternative. That's the objective. If that's weeks, that's weeks. If it's months, it's months. If it's longer than that, it's longer than that. But we're not saying this is like a 2-year program that you have to go through certain models, and at the end of 2 years, we'll try to find you a place to stay. And the integration and connection with other supports in the community, so like health supports, cultural supports, happens early on in the stay. People ask things like, well, why don't you just expand supportive housing options that are permanent? And I think this is one of those yes and moments like Jeff talked about during the lunch keynote. Yeah, we need more permanent supportive housing. And we also need something that fills the gap while we try to get more online and that is going to figure out the best possible results for some individuals where we don't have a good baseline of their strengths. We don't have a good understanding of what their goals are, that they could really be in a position where they're struggling. And this provides us a safe place to figure some of those things out without saying you are going to live in this building permanently for the rest of your life. Now, for some people, obviously, connections to permanent supportive housing work and work well, but this is really about making sure that we can help people discern for themselves what type of housing option they think is best. And how does it benefit the overall system of care? So if you think about people that are often in shelters for long periods of time, a number of those individuals will have the deepest needs. And they can get to a place where their daily needs are met through their routines, but they're really high needs individuals. And that could be everything from cognitive impairments like brain injuries through to mental health, trauma, substance use, etc. This gets us to a place where you say, okay, street outreach, you can offer a place to stay for someone in bridge housing. Shelters, you can identify someone who would be a good candidate for bridge housing. The shelter environment or the outdoor environment is not helping them progress towards their housing outcomes. Again, voluntary and invite. Improve matching to permanent housing solutions. So we have that period of working intensely with people to really cart through. And for some people, when they come into bridge housing, to be honest, they're not sure they want permanent housing. And that's okay. Like, you don't have to say, yes, I will come in here and absolutely, we're clear it's housing focused, but they may not be in a position where they're totally agreed. Discern which service and support options will be of greatest benefit to them. And this is where we have time to sort out things like how do we navigate across systems, and an opportunity to experience supportive housing with intensive supports prior to committing to that type of housing permanently. So again, a not for everybody approach, a very niche approach in terms of what it offers within the community. And as you start to see when Nicole goes through, even things like must desire permanent housing, yes, it's definitely on the list, but you could have some people who are like, I don't know what that looks like. You could have some people who are in a position where like, yeah, I want, help with other resources, but I don't know what those resources look like. It's a time of exploration. I'll turn the rest over to Nicole.
Thanks. Some key things I wanted to highlight about how the selection for bridge housing is that we do it strictly through coordinated access, right? So there's no paper referral. There's nobody advocating the hardest to get the person the service. We want to remove as much bias from the process as we can. So Ian and I came up with this list, and to be considered for the program, these are the things. So you must be unsheltered or using shelter services, although we always prioritize people that are unsheltered first. You must desire permanent housing at some point. You don't have to know what that is at time of conversation with you. And you must be on our by name list. So you must consent, that hype is consent, you consent to being part of our system. And so from that, it's our prioritization criteria. So this is how we prioritize that group of people to whittle down the list a little bit longer. A huge key learning for us is known barriers to housing access and maintenance. So just because we serve people that have been on the streets the longest in Niagara Region, and I mean some people that have come into the bridge housing program, we're talking 20, 25 years, 28 years, one gentleman living on the streets in encampments. Through that time, periodically, he was housed off and on, but it never worked out for one reason or another, right? So having those really open and honest conversations. We prioritize age, so we prioritize seniors and youth for this program. Although youth don't actually hit the mark a whole lot, that's something that we've learned. A lot of seniors, though, living in encampments. And then from there, I just wanted to highlight, I think this is what has made this program so successful to date. So we take a low barrier approach to the work, and that doesn't mean no barrier. It just means that we're really low barrier. Although the system in Niagara would say that bridge housing is the wet shelter, even though we're not a shelter, and I don't like the word wet. We have 15 units. They're bachelor-style units, and folks can actively use substances in them. We have no barriers around substance use except for you still have to be able to participate in meaningful conversation with the intensive case managers that work on site. You're not allowed to deal. And other than that, we're pretty low barrier. We want you to be safe. We want to talk to you about harm reduction. And I'm going to touch wood. And so for a system, and I'm sure this is, and many of your communities is the same, where you have folks overdosing all of the time, shelters that are not low barrier or programs that are not low barrier, people are overdosing in washrooms or behind buildings because they're trying to use all of their substance really quick before they get caught, and then they get a restriction. And so we've been operating for 1 year. We have not had one overdose or one death due to substance use, which I think really speaks volumes to the approach that we take around being low barrier and practicing harm reduction. So not only do we have expectations of, we call folks participants because they're choosing to participate in our program, we also have some expectations of staff, and those are shared commonly throughout the building with everyone. So I have a little video to show you in the interest of time, and I really hope it works.
Yeah, just give it a second till the YouTube thing.
Okay. Ian's telling me to wait a second, patiently.
Welcome to the Bridge Housing Program located at 5017 Victoria Ave, Niagara Falls, Ontario. The Bridge Housing Program serves chronically homeless, high-acute individuals who have a long history of living on the streets in the Niagara Region. The program is designed to be an intensive, short-term, low-barrier, continuous stay accommodation that helps bridge the gap from homelessness to permanent housing. The program supports participants through a trauma-informed lens and progressive engagement approach, while acknowledging each individual's limitations, barriers, and strengths. Bridge Housing is a safe, inclusive space for all. Bridge Housing is staffed 24/7 with 2 intensive case managers whose responsibility is to engage effectively with the residents who occupy the 15 bachelor units within the building. Staff work towards eradicating barriers to housing and moving individuals to permanent housing while attaching them to the appropriate resources within their communities. As a condition of accessing the Bridge Housing Program, participants collaborate and consent to the development of an individualized service plan with our intensive case manager team. This plan focuses on addressing barriers to enable participants to secure permanent housing. Throughout the duration of a participant's stay, daily case management is provided, which supports the service plan and life skill development. Participants that are selected for the Bridge Housing Program are unattached individual adults who are on the by name list, chronically homeless, and have a number of co-occurring and/or complex issues, including mental illness, physical challenges, chronic diseases, and substance use disorders, all within the context of economic poverty. Also located in the same building as the Bridge Housing Program is the Recuperative Care Bed Program. Recuperative Care is a 10-bed program that supports individuals who are experiencing absolute homelessness and are recovering from a medical procedure or illness. Thank you for coming along on the virtual tour of the Bridge Housing Program.
All right, so some data and outcomes. So I'll touch quickly on the Recuperative Care Bed Program. We didn't include it purposefully in this presentation because we want it to be strictly about bridge housing. Recuperative care came probably in February, I want to say. So we had one floor of the building that we were not using, and we knew that there was a need in our community. The emergency rooms were discharging homeless individuals in transfer ambulances to shelter doors, sending people in taxis that were not well enough to be in the shelter. And the shelter system historically is dorm settings. It's not accessible to everyone. So we created a funding proposal and just brought it to the Ministry of Health and said, hey, we know you don't have a call for proposals out, but do you want to fund this? And they agreed, as long as we could show that there was a reduction in repeat use of the emergency room to homeless individuals. So it is not for folks that are being discharged due to mental health. It is strictly around like wound care, postpartum, those types of things, medication management for short-term stay. And so hopefully next year we'll do a presentation on that because we're seeing a lot of great outcomes. And if you have questions, you could always email me. So data and outcomes from Bridge Housing. So we've been operating for 1 year. We've done 42 intakes with 36 individuals. So one of the things about our prioritization is if somebody chooses to leave Bridge Housing or moves out and it's unsuccessful, we always prioritize to bring them back in. So let's learn from that. Let's figure out what's happening and then let's try it again. So you'll see that 26% of individuals moved to independent housing, 11% to supportive housing, and 26% to family or friends. So family reunification has been huge in this program, and it was something that took us by surprise. We weren't expecting it, and we're adapting and pivoting to ensure that we're meeting the needs of that. 23% of individuals just said, like, this is not the right time for me. I appreciate it. Are you okay if I come back when it is the right time for me? We said, sure. 8% of individuals are incarcerated, which is not a failure in our books. And Kathy cringes a little bit when I say that. But generally, folks that are on the street, what we've learned in our community anyways, is that, you know, they feel like they're running from the law for petty crimes, right? So they got charged with something petty, then they missed their fingerprints, then they missed their first court date, and now there's an active warrant out for their arrest, and they feel like if they get arrested, they are going to be incarcerated for a long time, and it's the end of their life and all of these things. So we've been able to work through that with some individuals and say, go do your 60 days, go do your 90 days. We're going to prioritize when you get released to come back in because it's a barrier to focusing on well-being, housing, health, anything, right? Because they just feel like they're in this constant state of running. 4 minutes, I have one more slide. So some learnings. We did have 2 people pass away within the first 4 months of operating Bridge Housing, and they were 2 senior males who had been living on the streets for a long time. And so, although I've worked in the field for a really long time, and in the back of my mind, I knew like this is a possibility, I don't think I really prepared our staff team for that well. So 2 individuals died of natural causes, but they died with dignity in a space where they felt welcome, so that's really important. And overwhelmingly, males that are accessing our services, before they can focus on anything else housing related, they want visitation with their children. So something that we weren't prepared for, we were prepared for it while serving females and moms and folks that have had their children apprehended. For the males, it's just something that was over our head. So we're really working with the local FACS, our family services, to ensure that folks staying with us can have visitation with their children on site. And so that's been going well. And switching the mindset both of staff and participants from this idea of group programming and what's the mandate and what group do I have to go to no, we're going to sit down and determine what your goals are, and I'm going to work with you one-on-one towards that. So that's been a bit of a challenge. Connection to health, you saw in the video, there is a clinic in the building. So we have a family doctor that comes in half a day a week, and she'll meet with anyone and connect folks to primary care in the community. And we're a satellite site for our local positive living. So safe supplies, harm reduction, training for our team. It's been really key to our success, I think, in our success of not having overdoses or death due to substance use. Again, I talked about family reunification and pivoting on our own assumptions of what we think participants' needs are have been a huge learning for us. So, you know, I'm always amped up and excited about this program, and I'm like, we're going to offer all of these things, we're going to do all of these great things. And then people that come through our door, we talk to them, and I was like, oh, that's not really what they want. Okay, let's pivot and do something else. And just having the ability to do that has been great. So that's all I got. Thank you.
So you might be wondering which of the presentations is the good one. We can figure that out later. Michelle, do you have yours open already?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So I'd like to introduce Michelle to tell us a story about the Kawartha-Haliburton experience with starting supportive housing and then saying, oops, let's try again. How was that as an intro? Pretty accurate?
Pretty accurate. All right, thanks, Ian. So yes, appreciate being here today and sharing our experiences with you, and specifically our journey from permanent supportive housing, which I strongly believe in still, to the transition in place model. So the City of Kawartha Lakes is a municipality, but our first supportive housing unit was built in the town of Lindsay in Ontario, which is a small community of just around 30,000 people. And although I will say all the presentations I've heard at the conference have been amazing and top quality, this is just our humble story of the journey that we've taken and our experiences, and I hope that maybe the transition in place program is maybe a helpful tool for others in the room. So this is a picture of the municipality's first supportive housing purpose-built build. It's a 24 one-bedroom unit building, fully self-contained units, really big units, which is a lesson learned as well. It was occupied at the summer of 2019. And we had on-site support staff 7 days a week, but we did not get the funding to do wraparound 24/7 supports, nor did we have any health funding supporting our program. We were housing those from our by name list, and we actually cherry-picked the very top of the by name list as far as acuity. So when I say we took a courageous approach, we really did. And we wanted to have an opportunity to house those with the highest level of need. We built the building through various pots of federal, provincial funding. Because we are small, we had to put multiple years of funding together, and then we have all that fun multiple layers of reporting to go along with it, but we're used to that. And we're using ongoing provincial homelessness prevention program funding to fund the service agreement for the on-site supports. And the rent model at the building allows for naturally low rents without a rent subsidy, but rent levels are typical to that of rent geared to income. And initially, when we occupied, all the units were leased under that permanent supportive housing model, under a lease protected by the Residential Tenancies Act in Ontario. So, fast forward a few months later, after our courageous approach to trying to house the highest acuity, we did not plan for a pandemic to happen, nor did we plan for some of the outcomes connected to the pandemic, such as the Landlord and Tenant Board in Ontario putting a moratorium on evictions, which really challenged us when difficult situations arose and required an eviction to happen. And I will say we are very strongly focused on eviction prevention whenever, but when you're in a supportive housing model, under the Residential Tenancies Act in Ontario anyways, when something serious happens, unfortunately eviction is your only recourse. So as some of you may know from the pandemic, there was literally a 12-month hold on evictions, which then created a very long backlog, a backlog we're still dealing with for evictions of 12 to 18 months. So again, didn't anticipate that and didn't plan for that ahead of time. But also because of some of these pressures and stresses and no tools available to us to address any really heightened and serious matters that happened, lots of other challenges happened along the way. It really did put a lot of pressure and strain on our relationship with the contracted support provider. And so eventually we did have to change that support contract with another agency, and I will say good things do happen in really bad situations, and it became clear to us who in the community is willing to support this population and who maybe isn't at that place yet. Also around this whole same time was kind of the uprising of the opioid and drug poisoning crisis. Again, something we didn't initially plan for. And then of course, all of those things that I mentioned made for a perfect recipe for a lot of community opposition. So with all of that, we had no choice, but we had to make a significant change in our first supportive housing model. We literally had to reset the program, and we were looking desperately for other models. We connected with Org Code Consulting, and they pointed us towards a transition in place model. And upon review, we pursued the process to seek provincial approval to change models because, of course, as I mentioned, the capital funding going into the building came with a lot of strings attached to it and required us to actually get that approval from the province to seek that change in housing model. And that process alone took another 6 months to finally obtain that. But we did, and we were grateful that the province was willing to support it. And November 2022 was when we housed the first individual under the transition in place model. By this time in November 22, we were probably 6 months prior to that, we were not filling any units that were turning over at that point, and we were holding them vacant. So by the time we had the approval from the province to switch supportive housing models, we had quite a few empty units, which helped us make this transition, and I'll explain more of that later. But overall, like I've already mentioned, I'm still a strong believer in permanent supportive housing, and that's, truly the only way to end homelessness. But by using the transition in place model, we still had an opportunity to see households obtain that goal of permanent housing. So just, being totally open about our journey that we had, this is just a very small sampling of some of the opposition that we faced connected to the program. And I certainly heard stories from other service managers and other groups across the province who were facing opposition with their supportive housing programs because of ours. And although at the time I felt like this was only happening to Kawartha Lakes, hearing other stories at the conference, unfortunately, we're not alone to some of this NIMBYism and opposition. So the transition in place housing model, to get into some of the specifics surrounding it, it aligns most closely with an approach to permanent housing with approximately a 1-year period of supports. And during participation in this supportive housing approach, tenants would be identified as subletting their units until they take over the lease of the unit independently. The housing model allows for a period of stabilization and supports, but until the tenant becomes the leaseholder, participation in the supports is identified as an expectation of the housing program. The intensity and frequency and duration of the support is individualized to meet the needs of the households, and the duration of the supports can indeed continue past the tenant becoming a legal leaseholder of the unit. So for us, we are sticking pretty close to the 1-year mark, but we are already learning that there's a couple of individuals who are meeting some of their goals of the program and will likely be able to do that official transition a little earlier. And I'll let Carla speak to that more. So other components of the transition in place model. So I would say the supports are pretty similar to that of permanent supportive housing. So the expectation is that the support provider is providing some in-home visits and supports, and the supports are individual and caseloads can range depending on acuity levels and depending where everyone in that caseload is at on their journey to stabilization. And as far as operations and oversight, so initially under a transition in place model, the program participant is signing an agreement with that service provider. And then subsequently, once they graduate, we'll call it, into more of that permanent housing, they would sign a lease, and that lease, depending on your model, ours is rather complex, would be with the landlord, which may also still be with that same service provider if they are also the landlord. And the participant fees, for us, we're keeping them equal to a rent geared to income rent level. So, moving from permanent supportive housing to transition in place, and maybe we are completely unique in this situation, but wanted to kind of share our experiences with this. So we know the law around the Residential Tenancies Act. We know we couldn't have taken people's rights away who already signed a lease under the RTA. And like I mentioned, we were naturally accumulating vacant units. So that gave us an opportunity to legally switch individuals at that, when we're bringing in new individuals to the building, switch them to the transition in place model. Some experiences that we have had, because there are 3 parties actually in our transition in place model. The municipality owns the building. Our local housing corporation is the property manager and would be then the landlord after the transition period. And then we have now contracted the John Howard Society, which Carla is with, to actually provide the support services. So there is a few head leases in the mix. There's a service agreement with the city and John Howard. So maybe a little bit more complicated for us, but if we figured it out, others could figure it out too. So thank you, and I'll pass it on to Carla.
Thanks, Michelle. So I'm going to talk about our kind of short, I can't see over. The way we deliver the program, which is really my favorite thing, is dealing with people. So some goals of our program are, when we came to the building, we really focused on integrating ourselves into the building, because there were already residents who lived there. They already had a culture, so we didn't want to come in and just start telling people what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. We needed to build a rapport with them, so that they would come and tell us what was happening, because there were a lot of safety issues that were happening, as many of you can maybe relate to. So we wanted to improve safety. Reducing stigma is part of the goal. This building has a huge target on it, and everything that happens in Lindsay is this building's fault. And supports are client-centered, and the case management does support people with, social determinants of health and other factors that are affecting their stability. And then essentially, we're just there to support their journey to permanent housing, because that is the ultimate goal. Oh, okay. So we're going to have a quiz. I have a professor who used to call quizzes and tests a celebration of our knowledge. So we're going to have a celebration of our knowledge. The building, is a housing first model. Those are the core principles. So I thought we could play a little game, and you guys could help me list the 5 principles for housing first. So if you just want to put your hand up, or shout it out.
Person-centered.
Yeah.
So being person-centered, self-determination, client choice, all those things, or participant choice, yep. So that is part of it, but not entirely.
So you said individual and client-driven supports?
Yes.
Okay. Sure, back there. Safety?
So close to one of them.
Sure.
Well, it'll be a bonus one.
Okay.
You know what, you can have a small candy.
Sure, back here. Housing is a right. Immediate access to permanent housing with no readiness requirement. Sure, up here. Yes, social and community integration.
Who said social and community?
Right here. Over here. Yes, recovery orientation. And and right here, I think somebody here had their hand up. Oh, I'm sorry. You can still have a candy. Sure, right here.
I don't know if it was the first one on your list, but like, I don't know how to say this, but they don't have to have had it figured out. Like, they don't have to be sober, they don't have to have mental health figured out. Like, it's housing first and then services after. Wraparound supports.
Sure. Participant choice and self-determination. That's the last one.
No readiness requirements, and then they get to decide if they're gonna work on what they're gonna work on.
Yeah. Awesome, thank you. So yes, these, I'm not gonna click. These are our, so, I mean, this isn't, our case management, but this, I feel like when we need to reevaluate what's happening or what isn't happening, we go back to the core principles to make sure whatever we're delivering meets these principles, and we are on track with that. So here are some pictures, because building, the culture of the building and creating community in the building and us being a part of that was really the main goal. The building needed some stabilization, and people were not feeling safe in the building, people were not feeling safe outside of the building, the neighbors weren't, so we went for it. We had barbecues, we had raffles to try to improve client engagement, because there was some people wouldn't engage because other people were threatening to harm them if they were talking to service providers or people who, had some authority in the building. So we raffled off a bike. That person won a bike for, and the engagement piece is attending appointments, but it's also meeting their goals, attending appointments, dealing with things outside of us that they were accomplishing. And we try to invite collaterals and other people, other service providers in the community to come and engage with the people who live in the building. And that's a little picture of our team. So shout out to our team at John Howard for their passion, compassion, and service. So onboarding, as Michelle mentioned, we work with the by name list. So we are given a by name list within the acuity that we need to look at for the participants. So we have a furnished unit. As per the research, we try to have everything that somebody needs for 3 days so that they will try to stay within the unit. So food, cleaning products, hygiene products, furniture. It's a balance furnishing the unit because some people want more autonomy than others. We learned that it can be quite overwhelming if we allow people to open all the boxes of things to put on the shelves, but some people want that. So it's just really figuring out what that person wants as they settle in. We try to offer lots of opportunities, social, recreational, educational, occupational, vocational. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And when we're doing our case management and looking at where people are at, we talk a lot about safety. Any of the expectations that we have, we do, give people violations when they've, had a no trespass person in, or we just to acknowledge that that's a behavior that increases risk to safety, and that it really all the choices, all the rules come down to them being safe, us being safe, the visitors in the building being safe. And then we use temporary restrictions as a way to manage aggressive behavior. So if somebody's come to our office and they're, demanding whatever, we of course try to, de-escalate them. But if they continue, we will restrict them. Not for a long time. We will complete a form, write down the action, tell them what they're restricted from, and then give them an appointment date so that they can come and have a conversation about, what happened, what they can do differently, and it's just a restorative conversation. And just a reminder, I think it's always a reminder for us that readiness is not a component of somebody being housed. And what are we using to decide that? Our biases. So readiness is not a requirement, ever. Some challenges, stigma, right? Always stigma. So our harm reduction team at John Howard comes into the building, but so does PARN, another agency in Peterborough, and they offer lots of supplies for people and some programming. And our harm reduction team does a really nice workshop about stigma. So we are able to educate our own staff team as well as some of our partners. And we just try to be mindful of our language and educate others where possible. It's challenging sometimes managing relationships with other support providers and the landlord. The landlord has a very clear expectation of, what is okay and what is not okay. And when we're looking at somebody's progress, we look at behavior change. So is there movement in somebody's, in their behavior, but their goals towards what they want? So we do try to talk about that a lot with people. So, because I do respect that other agencies have their mandate and their scope of work and what their goals are. So I just think we've learned that communication is super important so that we can collaborate. And I would say one of the biggest challenges for the staff team is seeing people harmed and not being able to do anything about it, or feeling like you can't do anything about it. So we do try to focus on the positive. Somebody came to us for first aid. Somebody came and spoke to us. Somebody came and gave us information, because those are positives, even though it's difficult seeing people harmed or the people who are doing the harm still coming around. So a year later, it's actually about 18 months since we've been in the building. So we really, like I said, integrated into the building. We support about 99% of the people who are in the building. And we also support other people who are living in other social housing. And we also, it's a gray area, but we do try, there's lots of people who come to the building who are experiencing homelessness. So although they're not, say, on our caseload, we do try to connect them and support them. We have community meals, so we're not denying people a meal. Because it's the culture, right? It's the community. We're integrating into their community. And these are some factors that we look at with stabilization when we're considering somebody to be graduated or ready. They're actually excited to be graduating and to be offered permanent housing. So we look at financial. Is their income in order? Have they done their taxes? And have they been paying their fees regularly? Unit maintenance is, are they demonstrating the life skills of keeping their unit in a, fairly clean way, but also do they know how to navigate maintenance requests and tenant concerns and the things that they will need to do independently? Food security, are they connected to whatever resources? Are they able to meal plan? We do cooking with people so that they can freeze meals that they've made themselves. Are they taking care of their health, physical and mental health? Are they accessing resources? Are they connected to the community? We offer we try to offer a lot of experiences. We do nature walks. A group went fishing, so 5-6 people got their fishing license. We've taken people to yoga. We recently did Fleming College is in Lindsay, and it's more of an environmental site. So a group of people went and did a tour through the drilling and blasting program. So they had a lot of fun using the simulation, and I think staff had a great time too.
Just a couple more.
Okay, I better hurry up then. And then guest management is always a challenge, and that's another one with restrictions. If they follow the guest policy, then they're less likely to have people who are on the no trespass list. So that's fun. And then this is some of our success criteria. So this is just a really funny picture where we offer morning coffee to people. It's a way we can informally see people. And one day the coffee pot went missing. And so, we don't want to be punitive. Sometimes you do get upset, but you check it, right? So we made it fun and had a little laugh and put out missing posters that we needed people's help, that coffee was on hold because the coffee pot is missing. And when staff went in the next morning, there's the coffee pot on the floor. So just to wrap up, sense of community, making connections to the community, but also bringing agencies in. We have a teacher from our local school board who comes once a week to work on credits for people who want to work on that. So it's so easy, and then eventually transition people to the alternative learning center so that they can continue there. Managing relationships with partners and the landlord, continuing to educate ourselves and others that we work with, and just really lots of communication with all of our partners. And that's it.
All right. So if you have questions, please make sure you go to the microphone. That way the people who are watching the video of it later can hear the question. And if anybody is hearing compromised in the room, it'll also assist them with hearing your question. So come on down. Just let us know who you're directing the question towards, and we'll go from there.
Is this on?
It is on.
Excellent. Thank you. It's good to come to one that actually fits what I do. I'm with John Howard Society, big up. Here in Halifax in Nova Scotia, I'm the provincial housing lead. We are growing more rapidly than we can cope with just now, but the demand is there and we need to get that expansion going. One of the things I was thinking about all the way through the presentation by yourself, Carla, was how our level of our idea of success is completely aligned with the idea of success for the clients that we work with our guests. And one of the biggest challenges I face as the lead for the team that works so well with our clients is managing that and adjusting that, realigning their own ideas to stop them putting their own lens, their own bias onto what that success looks like, and actually start to think about it from where the client, where the guest, where our participants come from. It is a challenge and it's still ongoing, and we've been working on this now for the best part of, we opened our first house 2 years ago, but we opened our one in Halifax in February, which was a huge success for us. Transitional home. We've since opened one in Dartmouth across the water, where we were able to remove a lease, and we now own these two properties, and we now own a property down in Bridgewater, which is a drop-in centre, as well as community housing upstairs, and we're in the process of acquiring an old home hardware unit to try and turn it into some employability programme, perhaps, maybe more units, we don't know yet. But how do you get over that challenge? How do you work with your team members, and not just to you, Carla, but across the board, to realign your team's perception of success, of trauma, of all those pieces, when you're always on the front line, you're always dealing against burnout, you're always dealing against staff turnover, and you're continually trying to do it without burning yourself out at the same time?
James, thanks so much for the question. Carla, take it away. You're the first response, and then we'll see if others want to chime in.
It is an ongoing conversation. So we just, I think, reevaluate it on a regular basis. So when we're looking at where is a participant and what are they working on? Sometimes I need to ask, where is that expectation coming from? Is that yours or is that theirs? Because if it's our expectation for a participant, then, I mean, when we have expectations for people in general, we're usually disappointed, right? So, you know, it's just having those conversations that is that their expectation? And also, and we talk about behavior change a lot. And has somebody made movement? Because people make movement at different times, right? Like some are faster in some areas than others. So I would say it's an ongoing conversation of always checking where that's coming from.
Right. Nicole or Kevin, anything you want to add about change and sustaining change and success? Nicole has nothing. Kevin, use the microphone, please.
Okay. Just one piece. I think individuals that come to work in this environment and this field are doing it because they truly want to. I don't believe that people leave because they want to leave. I think they leave because they don't know how to do their job. So that continuous of training and developing their understanding. And when you talk about crisis, I actually heard it this morning, but it was like, if we're constantly putting out fires, let's train our staff to prevent the fires. So continuing to train the individuals and build up their capacity is going to help with those other pieces that come along with the client-centered approach, person-centered approach.
Awesome. Next question.
Hi, I just have a question about the bridge housing. You had mentioned that the residents are allowed to use substances in their units. And I'm working on a supportive housing model and we're wanting to incorporate that, but I'm wondering if you have any parameters that in regards to like using alone or testing substances or anything to kind of increase the safety of that.
Yeah, our only requirement is that folks have to tell us when they're using. So we do have guest hours, so folks are allowed to have people over in the unit. Sometimes they're using together, but we try to caution against that. So I know that, you know, it's out there that if you use in numbers, it's safe, but because we're staffed 24/7, we want to have an individual conversation with somebody about what harm reduction means to them. So everyone that's staying with us is very open. They'll come to my team and say, this is what I'm going to use, this is how much I'm going to use, this is how I'm going to use it, this is where I got it from. And I think it makes them feel safe in that moment, but also if they've gotten from a new dealer or if something looks off, they'll immediately tell my team, you know what, instead of coming by in 10 minutes to my unit to see how I'm doing, how about you come by in 2 because I'm not sure about this stuff that I'm going to use. So it's an ongoing conversation, but that's our only real expectation is that they're honest about that. If they're honest about their substance use, we could focus on so many other things besides their substance use. And in fact, we see a decrease in their substance use because they don't feel like they have to hide it all of the time.
I guess a quick follow-up, do you have any medical staff in the incident of an overdose, or is it just people that are trained for?
It's my team that's trained, yeah.
Excellent. Next question.
Hi. One of the housing programs I oversee is a 61-bed bridge housing site. It's mixed gender, and one of the issues that we're continually running into, we're one of the few sites that accepts couples. So navigating the intimate partner violence situations that have been occurring and kind of looking maybe for some suggestions or ideas on how you address that. Wanting to, of course, keep survivors safe while addressing behaviors and not further putting the person who's caused harm at risk or potentially putting them back into a situation of homelessness. If you've got any experience with that or suggestions on how you navigate those situations?
Yeah. Kinda. Okay. So because we're only 15 beds over 2 floors, we have 1 floor dedicated to male identified individuals and 1 to female identified individuals. And we have I worked for 15 years in the VAW sector, so violence against women is like close to my heart. But on the female floor, there's no males allowed. So it's a really hard rule for us, and that's due to trauma, trafficking, all of those things that happen. If a woman wants to have a male guest over, there's other spaces in the building that we let them use besides that floor to ensure the safety of everyone. Couples is a huge thing that we're running into because, we'll offer one person a space in bridge housing, but they want their partner to come. So we've just started to navigate that. I don't have great answers, but currently we're opening 2 emergency shelters that the region's going to be operating, and we have couple-specific areas, and that's to try and encourage folks to come in off the street that are living in encampments that are couples and don't want to separate. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of learnings there, but I don't have any great tips for you as of yet.
That's fair. Yeah, I asked the question in the gender-based violence session as well. So if anybody's got some suggestions on specifically also supporting those who are causing harm and preventing that cycle to continue and then mending back up in houselessness, love to talk to you.
And your name is?
My name's Kyle. I'm from Boyle Street Community Services in Edmonton.
Kyle, Boyle Street, Edmonton. Got it. Before Ty talks, does anybody want a chupa chup? Look up behind you. That was for James. Anybody else? This is like the t-shirt cannon part of the...
You guys should get another one for catching a
I think so.
All right, Ty, what you got?
My question's for Nicole and maybe you, Ian. Just about the bridge housing. We've kind of piloted maybe a bridge program. I'm just curious about what the staffing model actually looks like and if that's recommended and maybe why.
Yeah, so we have 2 staff on 24/7 and 365. So they're both intensive case managers with social service backgrounds.
Okay, so they're doing like the operations as well as case management 24/7?
24/7, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
the idea is we don't want to overwhelm people with case management, right? Like some people are morning people and let's grab a coffee and talk about, what we're working on this week or today or this hour. And other people are up at 2:00 in the morning, and that's a great time for folks to connect. So we really meet folks where they're at in terms of doing case management with them. And because we only have 15 individuals in the building, it's a fairly small group for 2 staff to sort of manage, even though they have a lot of complex needs.
Gotcha. Is there designated management just to that particular program?
We have a supervisor
Okay.
that supervises bridge housing and the recuperative care program. So she splits her time between both in the same building.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, next question. We are doing great with the questions, by the way.
Hi, this is a question for Nicole. I'm just curious if you're collecting any data around family reunification, if you're seeing like long-term success with that. Maybe speak to if you're seeing challenges. My experience in a previous program I worked in with transitional housing beds was that there was often very complex issues for why they didn't have family connection. Sometimes it was violence towards family. Sometimes family members had victimized them. So there was all sorts of complexities about rebuilding those relationships. So I'm just curious if you're a year in and the number was fairly high, I thought, in terms of like 26%. So have those relationships and housing placements been maintained?
Yeah, so not one of those folks have re-entered the homelessness system. And we have had a few folks come back with their family member to either use our team as like mediators to work through smaller situations. But we're seeing good success. I will say that Orcode's coming in the new year to do a formal evaluation of the program. So I'm sure he'll dig a lot deeper. We collect a lot of data, and so he'll have a lot to analyze when he comes.
And I do love to dig. Next question.
Thank you. Thank you all for the presentations. In the video, I saw one of the rooms, and it looked like a doctor's office, and I wonder about the white coat model syndrome, and people have been traumatized by doctor's offices, and so I'm just wondering about changing that up a little, and why did you incorporate that in the way that is there?
Yeah, so in Niagara Region, we have Reach Niagara. Thank you, Carla. And so it is a nonprofit organization that offers healthcare to the homeless. So they have a mobile van. They go into the shelter system. They also run our Safer Supply program in Niagara Region. And so when we designed the building, that medical space actually, no one in the building except for staff have access to. But they wanted a clinic that they can use to offer medical services to folks living on the street or encampments, so they can invite people into the space. Generally, when the doctor comes half a day a week, she does rounds to everyone's rooms and meets with them in plain clothes very casually. It's not like a lineup at the clinic, but so that was the purpose behind that.
All right, well, we're figuring out the next question. I found one Starburst double pack. Whoa.
Oh!
Well, there goes my work in New Brunswick. Hit the ADM with candy. All right. Next question. Okay. Anybody got a joke? How about interpretive dance of everything you learned? You just want to go. So last call for questions, going once. All right. I'll just repeat it. Don't worry about walking with her.
Yeah, I'm just wondering in Calgary, your capacity levels, if you've seen a surge where you're at. I'm from the city of Airdrie, and so we often refer people experiencing vulnerability and homelessness to Calgary. Yeah, I'm just wondering if what sort of capacity do you have for the centers?
Okay, so the question is, can Airdrie keep sending people to Calgary?
Yes. I think that Calgary is actually, we're in a very good and unique spot than other cities across Canada right now. We sit around 70% occupancy in the city. This is for single adults. And it's because we have a shelter that has 1,000-person capacity. We have seen an increase. We've definitely seen a dramatic increase in families, and female population has been the two over the last little bit. There are some plans for some additional family shelters, and we're looking at doing some expansion as well. But we still have capacity right now. Yeah.
All right, here we go. See, that was just a filler. Now we got another question. Here we go.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for all your information. It was very, very helpful. I have a couple questions, actually. The first would be, I think one of you mentioned whose expectations are we looking for? Are we looking for the person's expectations or the agency's expectations? And I guess I'm curious how you kind of bridge that gap, because especially I'm really excited to look into the trauma-informed practice side of things, but some of these things potentially might not align with how agency expects us to deliver programs. So how can we kind of meet that gap, I guess?
Go ahead, Nicole. Why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I don't know that I have great insight. I think for Niagara Region, bridge housing was a passion of mine. It was something that I wanted to try. And being a regionally run facility and our first actual direct operation, for me, it was okay, are we meeting the need of folks on the streets right now? And if we're not, then we need to pivot and change that. And so really looking at the data and the outcome and listening to folks who are living it is important to us and still is important to us. And if we are not meeting anyone's needs, it's not worth us doing it. Let's turn that building into affordable housing or something else.
And I would just pick up on the agency expectations of people. I think organizations that provide any sort of residential service, we do a better job having expectations of people than we do have rules, because expectations are socialized and rules are enforced. And you can tell the difference in an organization amongst the staffing that go through the change of becoming housing focused or more trauma informed is that you should stop hearing staff say things like, I caught so-and-so doing such and such, because that means you're in the mindset of surveillance. What you want to hear staff saying is, I supported so-and-so in understanding our expectation.
I feel like I could have a long conversation with you about that. Sorry, I have one more question. So I oversee one of the programs I oversee is a PSH program. That's currently in the middle of kind of getting revamped, but how have you incorporated like cultural inclusivity and diversity in your service delivery and also just your settings as well?
Yeah. For us, it's written right in our policy, right in our expectation, right in our participant handbook. We also have great partnerships, whether it's with the church down the road or an Indigenous Friendship Center that's down the road the other way. And we really just have a room that's welcome. We call it in the video, it's the community room, but we use it as our spiritual room. So anyone can have access to that at any time or invite anyone in. Or sometimes for us, it's just reconnecting people to faith, right? Whatever that looks like for them. And our team is dynamic and inclusive and comes from a wide variety of places and backgrounds, and that's really important for us.
Thank you.
All right, next question.
Hi, just a question for Calgary Drop-In. Do you know how many people that are housed that access your drop-in services?
Actually, very little. We developed a whole new database a few years ago to actually track that. And then we do a lot of work with our housing focused shelter work on actually that connection once someone's housed in community. We want to, if we know that someone's coming back because, say, their friend's there, I'll take the time to talk to the friend and like make sure that individual has a bus ticket every morning so they can go have coffee at Tim Hortons down the road. So supporting for that time period where that culture shock of housing happens. But yeah, we monitor that actually very closely to see when they're coming in for building check-ins and that, and then engage with the individual to find out why they're coming back and what can we do to support them through it.
Great, thanks.
All right, here we go.
Hi, yes, my name is Beth. I'm from Boyle Street as well in Edmonton. My question is for Carla. In your part of the presentation, you mentioned some of the challenges are seeing harm with other participants or done with other participants. And so my question is around like, how do you navigate that? One of the programs that I oversee is also a supportive housing program. And we have mixed gender 18 plus. And of course we have some really young residents who are vulnerable. And then we have some older residents who we suspect are taking advantage of them, influencing them, trafficking them. And so I'm just wondering if you have had similar experiences and how you might have navigated these challenges.
Thank you for that question. It's a good question, and yes, we've experienced the same things. And I guess in a few ways, there's lots of debriefing. We utilize the systems in place because when we do speak to, say, the police, they encourage us to continue to call, to continue to report. But a lot of times it comes down to the person reporting it. And we focus on relationships with people and just trying to help them feel as safe as possible to report things or to seek services that can support them with what is happening to cause harm. And I think it goes the expectations on people again, because I feel like trafficking is a tricky one where if you have staff that automatically assume that it's something the person doesn't want to do, I mean, that's a dangerous assumption because some people are engaging in work that they choose to, but we see people maybe sometimes choosing, but then sometimes being taken advantage of. So I would say we navigate it mostly by communicating with our collaterals, having conversations, having difficult conversations sometimes with other agencies. just working on the relationship with people, just fostering that so that they will come and talk to us and let us know what's going on and we can be there for them without judgment.
Well, how about them apples? Thank you for attending. Hopefully you all got the DI thing with the QR code. If not, there's one up here. You can just scan the QR code on your way out. You're also welcome to grab a mini Chupa Chup because I don't think Michelle wants to take those back anywhere. They're mini, so you're not going to spoil your appetite. And one last huge thank you to Carla, Michelle, Nicole, and Kevin. What a great panel. Thank you so much.